from Avencia, who's obviously our event partner for this event. He's going to be offering a little bit of insight into what's going on in the market. So welcome up to the stage, Chris.
Thank you, Natasha. So, yeah, there's kind of three areas that I wanted to talk about today. Generally, the trends in the market around technology, although we have heard some of that this morning, so I won't dwell on that too much. Second one is skill shortages, and open it up to the floor and have a debate around skill shortages and the candidate experience. And then finally, IR35, as this is an impending change that will have an impact on in-house recruitment teams. To begin with, just to get an idea of volumes of recruitment, I know Paul and Jason talked about sort of upwards of 1,000 hires. How many of you have below 250 hires annually? Okay, so quite a few. How many below 500? And how many below 100? Yeah, okay. So, just to kind of give you some context around Avencia. So Charlie and I founded Avencia in 2017. We specialise in 3 products or services: recruitment process outsourcing for permanent recruitment, contingent workforce managed service programs, and talent consulting solutions. Now, we specialise in that kind of small to medium-sized hiring volumes, and a number of our employees are here today. I think what was interesting when Jason talked about a panel beater in the afternoon and an actuary in the morning, Liz, who heads up our recruitment team, she might have an office manager in rugby in the morning, she might have a head of renewable energy in the afternoon, and then in the evening she might have to hire a risk analyst. So we, like yourselves, experience challenges around building scalability into our recruitment teams to deliver the services that we offer our customers. We complement in-house recruitment teams either on a project or pop-up basis or even on an ongoing basis. And in 2019, we were awarded by Nelson Hall, who are a HR services research body, we were awarded an innovation status as well as a major player in utilisation of technology. Now, some of this will ring true for all of you, but there's a lot of noise at the moment in the marketplace about all of these themes, and I believe Brexit might have potentially had a breakthrough during this meeting. But nevertheless, all of these have an impact on the way that you acquire and manage talent into your business. And this was something that Charlie and I specifically wanted to address, because we felt that actually organisations at that small to medium-sized hiring level don't always have the access to the expertise that they need. I think probably on a daily basis, some of these things dominate our... When you don't necessarily have volume, how do you drive a decision around recruitment technology? How do you decide what's the best type of technology to go for? Hopefully I can give you some guidance as we go through this. Analysts are predicting that over the next 5 years, it's going to get even more crowded. There are going to be more technology vendors all offering different products. An IBM study in 2018 targeted at C-suite identified 3 growth areas, and we've heard that from Jason particularly this morning, and to an extent Paul with Arctic Shores. Employer branding, big focus, up to 50% adoption, big focus on attraction and sourcing, and a big focus on screening and assessment. But it doesn't all have to be done on a big budget. LinkedIn is still our friend. It's still our greatest friend for sourcing, and we don't necessarily need a LinkedIn recruiter license to drive results. According to the IBM study, organisations use between 5 and 6 different recruitment technologies. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have less than 5 recruitment technologies that you use to run your recruitment? Less than 5? More than 5? Excel spreadsheet? Come on, there must be somebody. It's a safe space. No? Right, okay. In terms of investment going forward, I think the video interviewing is an interesting point, because Jason's obviously been convinced that it is working. Still, a number of organisations out there are not entirely sure how to utilise video interviewing and whether it is the most effective area. Growth areas are actually onboarding. So there's a recognition that speed to productivity is important, and onboarding actually bogs down recruitment teams. So you want to release your capacity to be able to actually get out there and source talent and reduce your agency spend. If you're bogged down in onboarding, one, you're not probably providing the best candidate experience, and two, as a recruitment function, you're not actually playing to your best strengths. So that's an area that people are looking at. The other area that the tech vendors are focusing on is workforce planning. Now, I've been in outsourcing for over 10 years, been in recruitment for about 20 years. Workforce planning gets mentioned every year, still not quite found a product that tackles workforce planning. Often it's a proprietary tool built in-house that delivers that. So how can you help yourselves to build a business case for investing in some sort of recruitment technology? Well, these are some of the barriers that are preventing you from making a decision. And hopefully if you understand some of these barriers, you'll come out the other side. So there's a lot of choice, too much choice. So try and narrow it down to actually what you want to solve. There's a cost implication, but don't necessarily just think about the cost of adopting the technology, but also think about what's the cost of change. How am I going to drive adoption of the technology? And thirdly, how quickly will I realise my return on investment? There's also an element of fear of missing out. You know, often we, particularly in recruitment, our relationships build on networks, both internally and externally. Somebody might be doing something bright and shiny over here. You're thinking, well, what do we need to do? It doesn't always have to be that way. So just make sure it's relevant to you and your organisation. And then ultimately, if you focus on your outcome and just a single outcome, and then if you look at what's achievable and balance between what do you need to do today versus what you might need tomorrow, because there will be technologies that can take you so far and then you'll have to change. And that's perfectly fine. You don't necessarily have to maintain the same tech stack. And then thirdly, what are you prepared to trade off? You know, what is most important? Is it actually candidate experience, onboarding, and less around attraction? Is it more attraction and less to do with workflow? The second area that I want to talk about is actually skill shortage in candidate experience. So over the last 60 years, we've had kind of three main areas for acquiring talent. So in the 50s and 60s and 70s, it was grow your own. In the 80s and 90s and 2000, it was very much a focus on buying in external talent. So build, not buy. Buy, not build. And then thirdly, we've seen with the large US tech firms that they're actually just acquiring businesses. And they're acquiring businesses not for the product necessarily, they're acquiring business for the talent. Now, in the UK, we hear an awful lot about skill shortages. How many of you actually think there is a skill shortage? Nobody? Okay, good. I think that's refreshing. For me, I think it's not about a skill shortage. I actually think it's about we've been too busy doing the same thing over and over again that we haven't been prepared to look outside the box. And that's not a criticism of recruiters. Actually, it's hiring managers and behaviours. So I came along today really refreshed that DLG were doing something different. It was great to hear that Metro Bank actually are looking at culture and to a degree mandating recruitment processes. In the businesses that we partner with, there's still a little bit of way to go around that. We still meet with hiring managers who say, I must have that skill set, I must have that experience, I must have that competency. Why? 9 months later, roles unfilled, okay, you were right actually, we need to do something different. Transferable skills. Still seems to me that this is a concept rather than necessarily a reality in some cases. It's fine at an early careers level, but what about experienced hires? And how do you unlock internal mobility? That's how you're going to address the skill shortage actually, is focus on internal talent and development of that internal talent. But that relies on a hiring manager having a very strong network internally. It also relies on an employee having visibility of all roles and opportunities. Again, there's actually things that can be done there that don't necessarily cost a huge amount. And what about this trend where we all are beginning to view ourselves when we're employees as actually customers? Well, that's really important because from a set shift for a recruitment team. Personalisation. How do you tailor communications so that, and from attracting through to onboarding, engagement, how do you tailor it to that individual? Communication. If you ask for feedback from your candidates, 90% of the time they say, I want feedback. Why is feedback still so difficult to obtain? It shouldn't be. Hiring manager behaviour. You as recruiters will constantly be asking for feedback. And technology is not going to solve that one because you don't have to give feedback into a system. So again, there's about cultural change and driving that through. Convenience. So it's very important that actually it's easy to apply, but you have a challenging selection process. And it's great to see that we have now seen a shift. Most websites are mobile responsive. Long application forms have finally died a death. But selection and assessments do need to be challenging. And that's fine. A candidate will respect that. And then finally, diversity. Jodie's talked at length around that area. But again, to me, unconscious bias is at play, absolutely, but so is conscious bias. Skills and experience and competencies is not an unconscious bias aspect. It's consciously deciding that actually, I just want to keep recruiting the same type of profile. And that's why we have a skills shortage, is because we just continually go to the same pool. You get it in this room, we just need the businesses that we work for to realise that as well. My final area, it's going to be quite challenging to make a very dry subject interesting, but I'll try my best. So final area is IR35. So I think I've got just a quick poll on this through Slido. So first question, how many of you have a plan in place for managing the change? Okay, second question. How many of you have decided to stop using contractors, are reviewing the need on a case-by-case basis, continue as currently, and looking at alternative resourcing approaches? Okay. Interesting, and the reason why it's interesting for Avencia is we've spent a lot of time over the last 6 months working with customers, HR teams, recruitment teams, supporting them through the change, and that's from anything from lunch and learn sessions through to actually delivering the IR35 project for them. In the smaller FS and insurance space, the vast majority are going to continue using contractors. And that's actually counter to the big banks. So the big banks have all come out in the last month or so and said, we're going to stop using contractors. Now, this has a significant impact on in-house recruitment teams, and I'll explain why in a moment. The good news is I think everybody in the room knows about IR35, so I don't have to go through this slide. What I would say is, in terms of specifically in the insurance market, what we're finding through the clients that we're engaging with is that the majority are looking at it on a case-by-case basis. There is an intention to continue using contractors. Some haven't made a decision, and a lot haven't made a decision yet, but the feeling we have is that, and the advice we're giving is, continue to use contractors, just make sure you're compliant with the law. In terms of the assessments, there was a mad flurry by the Big Four and various other firms to sell large, complex benchmarking tools and assessments. The majority of clients at the moment are going to use the HMRC CESS tool. And the reason why they're doing that is, if you use the CESS tool, HMRC aren't going to query the decision. But the HMRC CESS tool alone doesn't actually give you enough information. So what you need to do is combine that with some form of structured assessment, so that actually you can gather the correct data from both the contractor and the hiring manager before you input that into the CESS tool. Now, an updated version of the CESS tool was released, I think it was this week, which has addressed many of the concerns that people had with the original CESS tool, and it's much more fit for purpose now. We've also seen a growing interest in managed service programs from in-house recruitment teams and HR, and this is primarily because an MSP will reduce your liability as the end client, and also because of all these changes in process, they actually need a partner to manage that change for them. There's a capacity issue there. Now, in terms of why I think it's going to have an impact on in-house recruitment teams, and I think perhaps less relevant to you in the room, more relevant to the big banks, given that the majority of you are going to continue to use contractors, is that in actual fact, if you shut down the route to the contractor market, how are you going to fill those skills gaps? The contractor market is mature, has been in existence for 20 years, and I think there's a few things that I want to call out. So scalability to meet demand. You're going to get more permanent recruitment requirements. So if you're going to get more permanent recruitment requirements and you can't access the contractor market, and the contractor market's still going to exist, you're going to rely on the permanent market. The permanent market won't be able to pick up the shortfall. So how are you going to find that resource? Assessment and selection. If contractors start applying for permanent roles, thinking about what we talked about before, where you had hiring manager predispositions around skills, competencies, how do I compare a contractor who comes in for a specific role for a specific period of time, albeit they're not often used like that, but they should be, comes in for a specific period of time to do a specific role, how are you going to assess them for a permanent role where cultural fit is really important? The two don't align. So I think that there's a conundrum there. Time to hire. A hiring manager is used to a contract recruitment process taking from anything from 15 to 20 days. A permanent recruitment process could take anything from, for an experienced hire, from 45 days to 90. Who's going to manage the business's expectations when they can't find that resource quickly enough? Now, the big banks will obviously drive, if the big banks all decide not to use contractors, that's going to have an impact on the market. Of course it is. But my prediction would be at some point, and it may be in 12 months' time, that is not going to work for the banks because they can't fill the need through the permanent market. However, what I do see, and one other final point, sorry, linking back to D&I, is the fact that the biggest growth in the contractor workforce recently was actually women or carers wanting to come back into work who couldn't actually get the flexible working that they needed from permanent jobs. So they set up their own limited companies, and that way they had autonomy to enter the market. If we're seeing already, particularly in the Lloyd's of London insurance market, there's a challenge around flexible working, doesn't that run counter to diversity and inclusion? So again, I think there's some big decisions that need to be made there. What I do think is this is a fantastic opportunity for in-house recruitment teams, because no longer will contract recruitment be something that happens out in the business and our role is to administer and onboard contractors. Actually, we'll need to be sat side by side with the business consulting on the type of resource that they need. So as an individual in an in-house recruitment team, I need to be au fait with all types of worker, all categories of worker. I need to be au fait with all types of contract, and I need to be au fait with all sources and channels. So actually, strategically, I think your role will grow even more in importance. Any questions?